Hello, good morning. おはようございます。オスロにようこそいらっしゃいました。Welcome to the Oslo. Here is Professor Boyden, the first venue for this year's EAJRS. I'm really glad to meet so many people from all over the world. And now we open this conference with a director from University Oslo Library. Halén-san, どうぞ。Welcome.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Hanne Graver Møvig, and as the library director of the University of Oslo Library, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 28th European Association of Japanese Resource Specialists Conference here at the University of Oslo. We are currently today in the Professorbolig from 1856, and on your way here today, you walked past the law library in our oldest library building. Friday and Saturday, the sessions are held in our newest library, the Humanities and Social Sciences Library at Blindern, where our collection of Japanese and East Asian literature is to be found. We hope that you have the opportunity to take a look inside the library in one of the breaks, and you will find the Japanese section on open shelves on the 3rd floor. Japanese has been taught at the University of Oslo for more than 50 years, since the start of East Asian studies in 1966. To celebrate the 50-year anniversary in 2016, the University Library held an exhibition of relevant books written by researchers at the University of Oslo. That work showed us to what extent Norwegian researchers have contributed to Japanese studies, despite the fact that Norway is a small country. The University of Oslo Library has held Japanese materials in its collection since before the East Asian studies were established. And initially, works were contributed by Norwegian missionaries and merchants who lived and worked in China, Japan, and other Asian countries in the 1800s. When Japonism became popular in Europe in the late 1800s, the library started acquiring materials from Japan. The size of the collection is not as big as other European countries. However, we have some beautiful material, like the drawing featured on the cover of this conference program. The University of Oslo Library is currently the only library in Norway which actively develops its Japanese collection. 2 other Norwegian universities offer Japanese studies, and these receive some level of support from the Oslo Library. Our Japanese collection is not large enough to cover all needs of the research community. We therefore appreciate the opportunity we have to collaborate and share services with our colleagues internationally. And networks like the EAJRS is therefore very important to us. Another organization whose work we appreciate is the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies. They provide access to expensive digital materials through the Asia portal and acts like a hub for the Asian networks in the Nordic countries. And thanks to these networks, the University of Oslo Library can serve and support students and researchers with their needs. Japanese studies and Asian studies are relevant for the Nordic countries, even though they are small in size. And as an academic library, we use every opportunity to support these communities. Academic resources available are changing rapidly. To keep up with the situation, conferences like EAJRS will help us understand and develop our contribution to the academic needs. Sustainable development of resources and services are essential for our future. So, I wish you all a fruitful conference and a pleasant stay here in Oslo. And I hope you will return from this conference with new ideas and expanded network and lots of good memories.
Thank you very much. And next is Professor McVey from Japanese Studies. He is great for you.
My name is Mark Taven from Japanese Studies here at the University of Oslo, and on behalf of our Department of Culture Studies and Oriental Languages, I would like to welcome you all to Oslo. So we just heard the library. I'm from the student side, from the people actually using the material. And so Oslo has one of two university programs of language-based Japanese studies in Norway, and the only one with an MA and with PhDs. We have 6 full-time members of staff, and we have 1 fantastic librarian, whom you all know. Yeah, very lucky there. Yeah, and we have about 70 new bachelor students coming in every year. And about 10 to 15 MA students, and we have a few PhD students. That is actually quite a big size for a language program, and I think it's bigger than any other language than English in this country. It's bigger than Chinese, Arabic. So the program in Bergen has the same amount of students, and we could have more than twice as many students if we let them all in, because here students study from tax money, right? So we can't take in more than 60. But we could have taken in 120 easily if we took all the students who wanted to come. Now, we teach language courses, as well as courses about everything from history to modern society, religion, politics, media, and so on. And our aim is to educate Japan specialists who can do independent research on Japanese issues with the help of Japanese language materials. That is our goal. So both to do our own research and to enable all these students to write their essays, all in the same 2 weeks, about a wide range of issues. So we access to materials of all kinds, and quite quick access to materials of all kinds is absolutely essential. And life is becoming easier every year, I must say that. But at the same time, it's also becoming more complicated every year. I noticed that young researchers are much better than the old guard like me. They find databases all over the place. What I do is I find stuff on Siny, and then I find out that I can't access it online, and then I have to book a flight to Tokyo, and then I have to stand in front of a copying machine at Waseda University, and I do that a lot. And then I wonder why they don't have a scanning service there, and why they don't have Wi-Fi in the library, and so on. Yeah, so life is hard for people like me who can't really get all the information and process it. So often we find out that very interesting materials exist somewhere out there in the Kokai Toshokan or whatever, but we have to wait for 3 weeks or whatever, and that's after the conference, or that's after the paper deadline has passed. So that is a very common problem, that especially for MA students, this is often deadly. Also, databases are getting more expensive every year, it seems. As the librarian, director of the library already said, so we are competing for funds with medicine, and you name it. We are bigger than most people think, but still our budget is not bigger than big. It is becoming more and more impossible, also by the year, to actually pay for the essentials, even. So NIAS, which was already mentioned, is absolutely it's the only thing that saves us. But NIAS is in Denmark. When Denmark is going to change its policies and say we don't need NIAS anymore, we can't even vote for the Danish government. So this is a very precarious situation. If NIAS goes, Scandinavia goes with it. Well, Scandinavian Japanese studies goes with it, yeah. So, yeah, I'm not complaining. I mean, things are getting better by the year. There's so much interesting material that is out there that you are completely swamped. But it's also getting more interminable and more confusing by the year. And this is why we need conferences like this. So I'm very grateful that you all came to Oslo, and I wish you all a pleasant conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor McTeven. And now our chairman, Professor Vande Walle from Leuven University in Belgium. Please.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Dear friends, welcome to Oslo for the 28th annual conference of the European Association of Japanese Resource Specialists. Last year we were in Bucharest. We have crossed the continent this year to the other extreme and settled in Oslo, where we found hospitality here at the University of Oslo. I wish to thank the various persons and instances in this university for their willingness to be our host this year, especially my two predecessors, Mrs. Hanne Graver-Møvig. I realize that my consonants are pronounced too hardly, but she's the head of the University Library, as we heard, and my colleague, Professor Mark Thewen, who I know actually ever since his Leiden days, and who is the head of the Department of Japanese Studies at this university. We are revisiting the Scandinavian region after many years of absence. Our last conference in this area was indeed in Lund in 2005, which was a long time ago. And it was in fact in Lund that Naomi, our local organizer, first attended our conference. So there is some karmic link there, I believe. Since that time, she has been a very active and constructive member of our association, in the last few years also serving on the board. And we thank her vividly for her good work, for her willingness to be local organizer, and for the splendid organization she has set up this time. The University of Oslo is a mainstay of Japanese studies in the northern countries, and indeed in Europe. It is home to a number of top-notch researchers and to an increasing number of students. In general, Norway is also enjoying quite a high level of popularity among students wishing to study something Japanese. Of course, popular culture seems to figure very prominently, as it does in other countries. This year's special topic is digital strategies for Japanese studies, theories and practices. In the early years of the Meiji government, the predecessor of what is now the Tokyo University Historiographical Institute set out to collect materials for the compilation of an official history. When these bureaucratic historians would see how we are collecting compiling, mining, and arranging materials in an abundance they couldn't dream of, they certainly would envy us. Glancing through this year's program, I notice indeed an impressive array of presentations in the digital area. But fortunately, we also welcome a few presentations of a more traditional nature on specific collections and libraries. The program includes presentations from Europe, first of all, obviously, including Norway, Finland, originally Russia, but no longer Russia, I'm afraid. We'll explain what happened to our Russian participants later on. Lithuania, Ireland, Austria, and the Faroe Islands, which will not fail to shed light on some aspects that we have been less familiar with so far. In addition, there is one presentation from China, and to my great delight, a substantial number of presentations from Japan and Northern America. The summaries suggest very inspiring and instructive content. At the risk of repeating myself, the American and Japanese participation is a tremendous asset to our association, and I can only continue to reiterate my encouragement to our American and Japanese colleagues to attend our conference in ever greater number. As has been mentioned repeatedly at previous conferences, funding by the Japan Foundation is vital to the continuation of our activities. I must confess that in the past there have been times that I tended to be diffident about the continued support of the Japan Foundation in the future. But so far we have been enjoying their support, and I think also for this year's conference, and I think that it probably is to a great measure due to their recognition of the unique mission that our association is fulfilling. Also, by the recognition of the sincere efforts that our local organizers have always made to first and foremost find funding locally and elsewhere, and then as well with the Japan Foundation. This year's organizer has been very successful in this respect. Not only did she garner support from the Japan Foundation, but also from the Toshiba Foundation International, who is funding 3 scholarships, and from within Norway, from Idemitse Petroleum Norge, or Norge, known as a major sponsor of the Munich Museum, and the Japan-Norway Society, who have kindly awarded a grant to this conference. Both Idemitse Petroleum Norge and the Japan-Norway Society have been making major contributions to good relations between Norway and Japan in recent years. This year's conference features as keynote speakers Katsunori Iino of Bukkyo University Library, Koichi Hanyu of the Department of Media Studies of Tokai University, and Ritsuko Nakajima of the Japan Society of the Japan Science and Technology Agency. In addition, it is worth mentioning that the conference will be opened by Mr. Widar Halén, Director of Design and Decorative Arts at the National Museum of Art, Architecture and Design here in Oslo, with a presentation on Japonism and national identity. And that the first day today will be closed by a presentation of Ika Kaminka of the Norwegian Association of Literary Translators. This year we received 12 applications for the scholarships. Most of the applications were of very high quality, presenting attractive, original and relevant topics, but unfortunately, due to the financial constraints, we could only honor 3 of them. I take the opportunity to pay tribute to the vital role and contribution of the resource providers, both the public or non-profit organizations, as well as the commercial vendors. We thank them for their presence, for organizing every year a workshop, and for the updates they provide. They constitute a major contribution to the conference and significantly boost the skills of the users of resources. Hirotatsu Kano of the London office of Kinokuniya very efficiently organizes and coordinates these workshops. The Conservation Preservation Work Group, established in 2014 within the bosom of the EAJRS, has been continuing its activities, implementing the findings and recommendations which resulted from its surveys. I would like to pay tribute to Akio Yasue and the members of this group for the excellent work they have done so far, as well as for updating the website they have devoted to their specific activities. The EAJRS continues to support a number of initiatives, including the Japan Specialists Workshops, organized by the National Diet Library, as well as the JAL workshop or project, Japanese Art Librarian Project. In its own words, this is a project for inviting, giving training to, and exchanging with Japanese art librarians from outside Japan. Sponsored by the Agency for Cultural Affairs, on the 9th of December of last year, it held its third and final open workshop on, I quote, recommendations for more effective dissemination of information on Japanese art-related materials. My Leuven colleague, Arjan van der Werf, Secretary of the Association, once again has taken on with great efficiency and accuracy the administrative work that comes with the organization and of the conference and the other activities of the association. I would like to thank the members of the board who have all accepted to chair a session or two each. The local organizer, Ms. Naomi Nyabe Magnussen, has been working hard to make all practical arrangements with this university, colleagues and outside partners, as well as filing the applications to various supporting bodies. And we all know that procedures become more complicated by the year. We owe her a great debt of gratitude. There remains much to be done to further our cause, and we just heard a testimony from the floor from Professor Mark Theun, who voiced a few of the frustrations that he encounters in his work. Indeed, an ongoing concern remains the implementation of the principle of universal access, incorporated in the mission statement and the midterm plan of the National Diet Library, to just name one institution. Increased demand for access to the library materials from users in countries all around the world figures prominently in this new plan, but in reality, we bump into lots of impediments and obstacles. We need more vigorous progress in digitization on the one hand and unimpeded access, including a legal revision of the copyright legislation in Japan to boost Japanese studies abroad. I haven't visited Oslo and Norway indeed since 1988. It must be a different place now, but the major landmarks are fortunately still there. A Japanese proverb has it that the sky in autumn is high and that the clear air actually whets people's appetite. Ten takaku uma koyuru aki. Actually, its original meaning is quite something different, but that aside. Clear skies are uncertain in these regions. The weather is very variable, so perhaps we are more prompted to think about another Japanese expression, otoko gokoro aki no sora. Or if you prefer, onna gokoro aki no sora. Nevertheless, I think that the showers and the gusts of wind are part of the landscape and only add to its variety and and diversity. According to the World Happiness Report of 2017, Norway tops the global happiness rankings in this year. Another word comes to mind, a Japanese word, ayakaru, which is hard to translate, but it means something like to share in someone's luck, someone's good luck, or to follow someone's good example, or to be inspired by someone's good example. So let us share in this Norwegian luck. Let us follow their good example. Let us be inspired by them and make this conference a most happy, successful, and exciting one. Thank you. So I think we're just in time for the first session, which I have the honor of chairing. And our first speaker is Mr. Halén Widar from the National Museum of Art, Architecture and Design. And he will talk about Japonisme or Japonism and a new national identity in Norway. Yesterday I saw the catalogue that was published at the occasion of the, actually it seems to be published by Mercator Fonds, if I'm not, that's a publisher of Belgium, incidentally, so there is some karmic link again. I gladly leave the floor to you.
Can we get this just one screen? One picture at a time? Yes, here is the catalog. Ohayo gozaimasu, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at this prestigious conference and to enlighten you about Japonism in Norway. And it all, in fact, began here in this very building. The professor and the director of the university will have trotted across to the main building for the opening of the ethnographical museum at the loft. In fact, it was a loft at the top of the main building in 1854, the very year that Japan opened for foreign commerce. And ever since, we have collected Japanese art in Norway, as well as in my museum, from the 1870s onwards. And last year, we made a huge exhibition here, a collaboration with all the Nordic countries and international scholars contributing to this catalog on Japan influence in the Nordic countries. We call it Japanomania in Nordic countries. And it was a catchy name, and it caught the attention of 163,000 visitors. So we think this catchy name perhaps helped for that. It was a great event, and it summed up 30 years of my research since I did my doctorate on Christopher Dresser and the cult of Japan at Oxford in 1988. Japonism was, as you may know, a well-known phenomenon in Europe and the US by the time Nordic artists and designers incorporated it in their creations. The influence was twofold: directly from Japanese art available in North and indirectly from continental and British Japonism. And the concept of feudalistic, almost medieval Japan had facilitated the reception of Japanese art. And in the Nordic countries, it reinforced the idea of a national identity, particularly in Swedish-ruled Norway and Russian-ruled Finland. Nordic artists recognized a similar emphasis on national myths and fairy tales, as well as an intense love of nature, which coincided with their artistic aspirations. The American art historian Erika Warren has suggested that the impact of Japonism in Scandinavia, and particularly in Norway, as she said, is best in the use of an imagined Japaneseness to help promote imagined national identities. Norwegian nationalists, such as Gerhard Munthe, we will see some of his paintings, capitalized on the usefulness of Japanism in creating a new national identity. National Romanticism lingered on in Norway, especially as the union with Sweden drew to a close and finally was dissolved in 1905. The symbiosis of the Viking revival was so-called, let's see, we go forward here. Can we go forward on the I like to have a mouse, but I don't have a mouse here today. This one? Yeah, no. We should have this one now. Yeah, fine, thank you. Yeah. And thank you very much. That's excellent. And as you see here from the window next door, as a matter of fact, the Historical Museum, a fantastic building by Henrik Bull, 1902. You see the Norwegian dragon linger on under here. This is from the staff entrance. That is the back of the museum, in fact. So have a look there. And underneath, there are some nice little shields or perhaps Japanese mons. We think he has looked at Japanese mon as well. He was interested in Japanese art and studied in Austria, among other places. So Japanism in Norway can first be detected in so this particular symbiosis of the dragon style with Art Nouveau and Japanism was a particular phenomenon around 1900. And Japanism in Norway can first be detected in the early 1880s when Japanese artifacts and aesthetics became visible in works by artists such as Harriet Becker. We here see Kitty Kielland's paintings, interiors. The artists Gerhard Munthe, Elif Pettersen, Christian Skretsvik, Erik Wernskjold, and Oda Krogh here, her Japanese lantern, and her husband Christian Krogh from 1885. In the corner of this painting, you see Edvard Munch sitting there underneath some ukiyo-e prints pinned on the wall. He was very secretive about his inspirational sources, but in Paris in the 1880s and 90s, he was part of the set around the Japanese Theo van Gogh and Siegfried Bing. And his Scream print, Scream printed in 1895, is very close to Hokusai's manga, as you can see here. In the summer of 1886, 5 of these artists, Bakker, Munthe, Kittelsen, Skretsvik, Pettersen, and Wernskjold, formed an artist colony at Skretsvik's farm at Fleskum outside Christiania. This legendary Fleskum summer has been regarded as the starting point for a marked Japanese inspiration in fine as well as in decorative arts. These artists were mainly painters, but several of them also worked within the decorative arts. They promoted the idea of a unity of the arts and crafts, which was a major theme in Japanese art, as well as in the British and French reform movements. Many of the paintings from that summer show Japanism ideas. For example, Munthe's From Bærum here, and Pettersen's Summer Night, and Skretsvik's Water Lily studies, which the art historian Andreas Aubert found partly Japanese in taste. Bright colors applied with vigorous strokes, diagonal compositions, bird's eye views, and a foreground study of plants and flowers are features of a new aesthetic idiom, which directly or indirectly emanated from Japanese art. All of these artists studied for shorter or longer periods in Paris, where it was difficult for anybody interested in new art ideas to ignore the widespread manifestation of Japanism. In the 1880s and 90s, a plethora of exhibitions and galleries offered artists access to Japanese art. A major event in 1883 was Louis Gonce's exhibition and publication La Japonaise, and evidently it attracted the Nordic artists in Paris at the time, and certainly Christian Skretsvik, who knew Gonce personally. Most of these artists were also friendly with the Danish artist and art historian Carl Madsen, who in the early 1880s made Japan-inspired paintings and published Japansk malerkunst in 1885. This was the first book of its kind in the Scandinavian language. Like Madsen, several of these artists collected Japanese objects, prints, and kakemonos. We can spot Japanese bronzes and ceramics on the mantelpiece of Munte's painting of his living room here. Skretsvik, who lived in France from 1879 to 85, had received at least 2 kakemonos from Louis Gons that are now in our museum. And a letter heading from Gray, dated 1882, show his early interest in Japanese art. Erik Wernskjold collected yukue and katagami that hung on the walls of his house. Several of these were gifts from the Norwegian painter Bernt Grønvold, but some may have emanated from Theodore Duret, the French collector of Japanese albums, books, and yukue, who visited Wernskjold and Skretsvik in Norway in 1890. Duret, who had been to Japan in 1871 and was a great mentor of the Impressionists, probably facilitated the loans of Monet, Degas, and Pissarro to the State Autumn Exhibition here at Tivoli in Christiania, which the capital was called then. His État in the Rain was acquired from the exhibition by the National Gallery and was much admired by Norwegian artists. At the State Exhibition in 1892, for instance, Munte noticed a number of Japan-inspired pictures. Monet evidently played a crucial role in the dissemination of Japanism in Norway. And in January 1895, Andreas Hubbard joyously announced that Claude Monet would visit Norway. He is coming to paint Norway's winter in all its light radiance, he said. Monet settled in Sandvika, just outside Christiania, staying for 5 weeks with Gerhard Munter's mother-in-law, Jenny Bjørnson. He was soon visited by Munte and probably all the Norwegian artists that were not in Paris that winter. It was no coincidence that it was in that year that Munte introduced the word Japanism into the Norwegian vocabulary. 1895 was a harsh winter, but Monet managed to move around. The landscape fascinated him, and he often compared it to Japan. He said, "I have a splendid view. Small islands almost level with the water, completely covered in snow, and a mountain in the background. One might almost be in Japan, an experience one frequently has in this country." Monet had a large collection of around 230 yukoi prints, and some of these have been compared to his sketches from Sandvika and Mount Kolsås, which you see here, just about Sandvika, which he in fact named My Mount Fujiyama when he lived here. He studied this painting and painted it in various lights and weather conditions. And it can be seen in some of the greatest museums all over the world. Clearly, Monet's works were of great boost for Japanism in Norway and can be detected in the emphasis of Norwegian artists on vigorous brushstrokes, flatness, and the intensification of color, especially in the atmospheric bright winter landscapes. Above all, Monet's Japanese-inspired idyllic harmony with nature and the fresh directness of expression made a lasting impression in Norway, although most Norwegian art historians have so far neglected this. Soon after Monet's visit in 1897, we hear about the first exhibition of Japanese yukoi prints here in Christiania. It was organized by the French collectors Siegfried Bing and Julien Leclerc, and it toured Helsinki and Stockholm as well. The exhibition was on view in Blomqvist's art gallery here in the main street, just about 100 meters from where we are now, and must have attracted a large number of visitors. Julien Leclerc also gave a lecture on Japanese art, which was probably the first of its kind in Norway. It included 215 yukoi prints and 16 kakemonos, as well as 400 inexpensive prints for sale. So that is interesting. And the main schools were represented by Harunobu, Toyokuni, Utamaru, Hokusai, and Hiroshige. The 400 prints for sale were quickly sold, and the exhibition was enlarged with yet another 50 prints. Fritz Taulau, who, like many other Norwegian artists, must have acquired some prints, enthusiastically reviewed the exhibition in the newspaper Verdens Gang, commenting particularly on the Japanese artists Utamaro, Hokusai, and Hiroshige. In accordance with Louis Gons, he stated that above all he loved Hiroshige because of his beautiful landscapes, which we see here. Above all, he praised Bing as the greatest mediator of Japanese art and thanked him for bringing the exhibition to Christiania. Hiroshige's famous river scenes inspired Thaulo's preoccupation with similar motifs, which he shared with his two inspirers, Monet and James McNeill Whistler. In 1897, Erich Wernschol received a visit from the Russian impresario Serge Diaghilev, who recognized a certain influence of Japan in Wernschol's, Munter's, and Petersen's illustrations for the national epos, The King's Sagas. If they bring to mind something, he said, then it is the Japanese, without otherwise being completely like them, he said. And quite a few of Munter's vignettes and Kakemono-shaped panels for this publication indeed conveyed a certain Japanism. His vignette, East Ocean Singing Its Song, for the king who died in foreign country, subsequently graced a plate produced of a porcelain factory, Porsgrunn. And it is now being shown in Tokyo in the autumn in connection with the Hokusai exhibition. Most Nordic artists traveled to the Nordic industry, agriculture, and art exhibition in Copenhagen in 1888. Danish, Japan-inspired porcelain and ceramics were highly praised, and by 1888, Nordic Japonism had clearly manifested itself. It received a great boost at the Nordic exhibition from the Japanese stand organized by Siegfried Bing. The Japanese could not present themselves since they were so busy preparing themselves for the 1889 exhibition in Paris. This broad and varied collection became a great source of inspiration to all the Nordic artists who visited the exhibition. Later that year, Bing launched his highly influential monthly magazine, Le Drapeau Artistique, Document de l'art et l'industrie, which our museum also acquired. And the periodical, in fact, was so popular with our artists that it was virtually destroyed. We had to buy a new holding for this exhibition. Retrospectively, Andreas Aubert reflected on the Nordic exhibition, saying that the Danish artists were a shining example for us. And he particularly lauded the collaboration between fine and decorative artists. Aubert asked for a similar contribution by Norwegian artists. He pointed to the Porsgrunn porcelain factory and noted that the Museum of Decorative Arts had acquired Japanese porcelain as good examples for the industry. But nothing will happen, he said, until Norwegian artists make an effort. Gerhard Munter was the first to take up Aubert's challenge, and in a notebook from the early 1890s, he revealed his great source of inspiration. He says, the movement that from Japan is coming across Europe now is coming because our decorative art has been set aside, involuntarily set aside, while Japan has put all its resources into its decorative arts. These new impulses, combined with his interest in medieval and national themes, brought a new direction to Munter's art. He lamented that Norwegian industry had mainly copied foreign prototypes, and in order to remedy this, he made some patterns for porcelain, wallpapers, and textiles. About 80 of these drawings are prepared in our museum from 1890-91. And revealing simplified compositions of local flowers, as you see here, plants, birds, and animals, such as this small trout and marsh marigolds. And there is a strong move towards stylization, as you see, thick contour lines, and a certain abstraction, which brings to mind the Japanese textile and woodblock albums of Katagami, collected at the time by the Museum of Decorative Arts here. In the summer of 1892, Munter visited Paris and Siegfried Bing's gallery, where he acquired Japanese ceramics for 42 crowns. He also made watercolors of Japanese textile patterns and Japan-inspired French ceramics with running glazes and a blue and white pattern which probably inspired his own service for Porsgrunn Porcelain Factory in 1892. Munthe designed a blue and white pattern with the national flower, blue anemones, just after his Paris trip. He introduced some zigzag patterns around the edges, which in fact in Japanese art symbolize clouds that can give rain to the spring flowers. A swastika formation of flowers and stems in the middle of the plate was also introduced, and the thick contour lines and stylized flowers and leaves recall Japanese patterns. Blue anemones was enthusiastically welcomed as our first national pattern by the largest newspaper, Aftenposten, in February 1893. It can still be found, but it's rare, so if you see it, just buy it. In 1893, Gerhard Munthe exhibition's 11 fantasies of Norwegian fairy tales, aquarelles with titles like Daughters of the Northern Lights, which you see here. And once critics said that they were to presage the ornamental art of future times. They were later transformed into tapestries by Munthe's wife Sigrun from 1893 onwards. And at the weaving studios established by Frida Hansen in 1897 and by Jens Thies at the Museum of Decorative Arts in Trondheim in 1899. Thies welcomed the fact that, as he said, Munthe has precisely this attentive sense of detail, such as contours and splashes of color, those that the Japanese possess to such a great degree. Here, national and Japanese impulses constitutes a perfect symbiosis. In these national motifs, we recognize the patchwork-like combination of patterns juxtaposed with stylized figures and ornaments that resemble the so-called Japanese harimase patterns. They can be compared to illustrations in a book of Japanese textiles, which were published by the Imperial Museum in Tokyo in 1892. And these books were widely distributed in Europe and were acquired by the National Academy of Arts here in Christiania at the time, and Munthe may well have seen these books. Frida Hansen was the initiator of the weaving renaissance in Norway around 1890. Her quite remarkable weavings from 1889 to 1994, she made patterns mainly in the national geometrical style, but her Olof Liljekrantz carpet here from 1894 with the flat juxtaposed constellation of patterns, strong contour lines, and stylized floral borders are closer to Munthe's sophisticated Japonism. The cloud-like patterns that you see coming across the whole weaving can be compared to some Japanese textiles that the museum received from the department store Sten & Strøm in 1885, where similar clothes are across the textile. This Japanese influence was strengthened during a visit to Paris in 1895, when she made the drawings for the mermaids lighting the moon, featuring the constellation of flat and overlapping patterns with marked lines and ornamental borders. In 1897, she exhibited this particular weaving at Blomqvist's art gallery here in Christiania, and certainly saw the first exhibition of Japanese prints, which was shown at the gallery just prior to her exhibition. In the same year, she founded a Norwegian weaving company and finished her Pentecost choir with juxtaposed Japanese-inspired patterns. Just look at the dresses, just like orbis put together, which was shown at the Nordic exhibition in Stockholm that year. Around the turn of the century, her elegant Art Nouveau and Japan-inspired weavings made a great impact at exhibitions in Central Europe, and she was acquired by most of the large museums. But the Norwegians were much later in accepting her. Hansen was evidently inspired by Japanese prints and other Japanese images, and Erik Wernskjold compared her works to the more restrained nationalism Japonism in Munter's patterns, and he concluded that they were too imitative of Japanese prints, actually derogative here, and Hansen was evidently inspired by Japanese yukue, katagami, and textiles, but the main problem was that her motifs were not sufficiently national for the Norwegians. So there was this big battle for being national, evidently, around this period. Her great breakthrough came at the Paris 1900 exhibition with the transparent technique with floral patterns that were clearly inspired by the katagami acquired by the Museum of Decorative Arts in the 1990s. Hansen was bought by most of the larger museums, but the Norwegians were late in acknowledging her great talent. The advent of Japanism in Britain had given rise to the term Anglo-Japanese style, also known as the modern English style. In 1897, a Norwegian writer used this term, and by then, this new aesthetic language had certainly made an impact in Scandinavia. According to the critic, it was characterized by a relief from rigid symmetry, or no symmetry at all, particularly in simplified pieces of furniture, lacquered in various light or black enamel colors with elegant metal fittings. And everything is kept light and easy in accordance with hygienic considerations, the critic said. Japanese pieces of furniture were scarce in the north, but during the 1880s, we occasionally hear about Japanese etagères and flower tables and wicker furniture. And it was not until the 1890s, however, that the Japanese influence could be detected in Nordic furniture. Among the first were those in Japanese style drawn by Hans Wilhelm Schröder for the Royal Palace in Christiania, which you see here. The design magazines repeatedly promoted the fashion for Anglo-Japanese furniture, but also questioned the popularity of the so-called green-yellow English furniture. The critic was probably referring to Gerhard Munter's green-yellow hall furniture for his home, which he began designing around this time, and the light colors of his interiors, and his furniture for the fairy tale room at the Holmenkollen Hotel from 1896, with a hybrid peacock bird and dragon at the top. The green reality style, as it was ironically called in England, Japanism, referred to the most popular color of a combination in Japanism, in fact, these green-yellow colors. By the turn of the century, the Anglo-Japanese style was hailed as a modern style in Norwegian furniture. A critic said it appears that this year will constitute a turning point in furniture, which from now on will turn away from the heavy and formal towards lighter forms. In a search for models, one has traveled far, all the way to the art of Japan. In 1900, Henrik Roche, the prior director of our museum, summarized the Japanese influence in Nordic countries, saying that Japanese arts and crafts suddenly revealed itself in all its glory at the exhibition in Vienna in 1873. We enthused over this infinite, non-egotistic love for nature in all its varieties, which was carried by a master of unknown dimensions, and which had made a mark on all the works of the hand. In this happy country, there were no distinctions between arts and crafts. No wonder, therefore, that the influence of this intimate and lively art soon was seen everywhere in Europe. Yes, it became mandatory to the development of arts. Hence, a major part of the so-called new style has its origin in Japan, Henrik Roche said. To the Nordic and Norwegian artists, Japan was geographically and culturally remote. But the great impact of continental and English Japanism in the late 19th century had fostered an awareness of Japanese art as a monolithic, feudalistic, and almost medieval art, similar to the pre-imperialistic art forms that were studied and admired in Norway at the time. It reminded the Norwegians of what they had once been in the Viking and medieval age, and the comfort of similarity was balanced by the appeal of sheer novelty. National themes and a love of nature, combined with Japanese impulses, constituted a perfect symbiosis. Norwegian artists were in fact influenced by Japanese art because of a basically affirmative predisposition towards it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Widar. There is now time for a few questions. If you're okay with questions and commentaries. So the floor is open for questions.
Have the Japanese scholars been active in your
Well,
society?
some of them, yes.
Yeah.
Actually, if you allow me, I have a question. How I can imagine that the dragon style or the Viking style is connected with the formulation of a Norwegian identity. But how can, Japonism contribute to that, because it's so foreign? And actually, you even pointed out that someone, Frida Hansen, was criticized for not using Norwegian enough motifs. So I wonder whether the Japonism influence had especially its impact on the unity of arts and crafts, rather than on, let's say, the formulation of a self-consciousness.
Yes, I understand your question. I have shown several examples that provide the opposite in this lecture, among fine art artists, among decorative artists. And evidently there was a national interest, but they needed another outlet. It would become too self-indulgent if it was to look at only medieval Norwegian art. You needed an outlet. You needed something more. You needed a new impression to make a new art for a new century. This was part of the Art Nouveau movement as well. And so evidently it became a liberation for them to see the Japanese, which was similar to their own art in many ways, with the emphasis on naturalistic and the big nature themes, in fact that they also had the dragons. So in many ways there were similarities that they could relate to. And of course, all the fairy tale business, which also is very important in Japan. So there were many, many links there.
Okay, fine, thank you. Yes, please.
Would you be so kind as to pass the book around?
Yes. Yes.
The question.
So, it wasn't a question. I was just asking if you could pass the book around. That was all.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
The answer is yes. I see another one, yes.
Did any of the Norwegian artists you mentioned have the opportunity to travel to Japan and spend much time there, or was the influence mostly through the purchase of works by Norwegian museums that they then saw here? Mostly
what they saw here. None of them traveled to Japan. The first artist who traveled to Japan was Christopher Dresser, whom I wrote my doctorate about in 1876. He traveled to Japan. That was the first European artist from Britain. But none of these early artists traveled. No, unfortunately. But as I said, there was a little museum here showing Japanese artifacts just in this very university from 1854 onwards, and we also had Japanese objects on view. But it must be understood from the enormous fashion this had. We would have no modern art in Europe if it hadn't been for Japanese influence. We would have no stylization, we would have no abstract art, we would have no asymmetry. All art in Europe was symmetrical. So there are so many things that we are grateful to Japan for the development of modernism in Europe, and also in Norway. If we hadn't had the Japanese influence, we would have ended up in a medieval misery. Total medieval misery. It enlightened and it brought out new aspects which made them able to formulate a totally new artistic vocabulary.
Yes, please. Another question, yes? Yeah.
Thank you very much. And this is quite interesting for me because I'm following your lecture for Japan side of development of decorative art. But in any case, through my searching this context, seems like 19th century, especially starting 1851's London Expo of World Exhibition, and then following many expo, that seems quite influential vehicle for raising awareness of rest of outside of European artistic activities. So
1851 exhibitions were not very many Japanese objects. 1851, 1862 exhibition in London there were, and 1867 in Paris and onwards. Yeah.
Right. So yes, my understanding is the first one is the 1867 Tokugawa
in Paris
regime center, and that was the Satsuma ceramics.
All the main artists in Paris and London and in major capitals around Europe were inspired by Japanese art in this period.
Right.
So it's no strange phenomenon that we should have it in Norway as well. Yeah. All of our artists studied in Paris. So they were all aware of what was going on. And they collected Japanese objects, which I have shown here in this lecture.
Right. And so that coincides with European awareness of more decorative art for...
Yes. But my point was to show that there are affinities between Norwegian aesthetics and Japanese aesthetics. That is the important of this lecture, is to show that this naturalistic inspiration, this love for nature, this love for going out in the woods, picking small flowers, local flowers, rather than the big peonies of the roses that they painted in Paris, etc. Right. These things are vital for the affinity between Norwegian and Japanese aesthetics.
But that would have already been announced by the work of Johan Christian Dahl and people like that who would depict Norwegian beautiful, natural scenery.
Yes, but of a grandeur that would not appear in Japanese aesthetics.
Right, yeah.
They did not go into the small details on the earth and look at the small local flowers or the little insects or the butterflies, etc. That is what they did at the end of the century and what the Japanese did.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Mrs. Kuniko Yamada McVey from Harvard University, Harvard-Yenching Library, and she's going to talk about from hinagata to isho, opening Japanese design catalogs digitally. The floor is yours.
Stick.
Well, maybe you're accustomed to it. So.
Meanwhile, I get water. EAJRS. You need that? This side? No? Okay. Good morning. I'm a librarian at Harvard-Yenching Library for Japanese collection, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to introduce our visually rich and relatively overlooked materials in our collection. 2 years ago, Harvard-Yenching Library had digitized a group of Japanese visual design catalogs. And they are produced from... Ah, そうですか。They are Oh, it's on use? Thank you. Okay, back to the screen. So 2 years ago, Harvard-Yenching Library had digitized a group of Japanese visual design catalogs produced from the late 18th century to the early 20th century of 45 titles in 88 volumes. The collection represents both traditional Edo period visual design and some modern designs developed in Meiji period. Many of them are gifts from Ernest Goodrich Stillman, and he was a Harvard graduate of 1908, and as a sophomore, he went to Japan in 1905. That was his trip of a few months in traveling in Japan, and ever since he became Japanese art and book collector throughout his life. And he donated most of his Japan collection to Harvard libraries and museums. And he's a collector of many arts, including like French Impressionists. And these also, I understand, donated to like Metropolitan Museum of Art. So now, so our collection somewhat reflects, I would say, American collector's perspective when he collected these materials. So that's one interesting perspective. But now, but by the way, so these books are, and this middle one is his book plate, pasted in each volumes, and these are typically bound like by Stillman, and inside is just a mixture of book catalogs, a variety of catalogs, regardless of publication years. So interesting thematic compilation each volumes. So anyway. So now I'd like to show the development of modern Japanese visual design through images of these visual catalogs with a historical context while utilizing digital images of Harvard-Yenching Library and elsewhere. Okay. In Edo period, these design catalogs are called hinagata. According to Nihon Kokugo Daijiten, hinagata means essentially a model of something in drawing, or sometimes three-dimensional object in smaller scale model. And my quick search in NDL search for, say, hinagata in title and publication year between 1500 through 1900 and book format yielded 578 titles. As you see, these are the selective titles, Daiku Hinagata or Hishikawa Moronobu Tosei Hayari Hinagata or Sukiya Kohoshu. So as you see, these many practical purpose, like carpenters, like variety of manuals, and also like a fashion book by Moronobu, or even Hokusai involved in like kiseru, which is tobacco pipes, design hinagata, and other utensils, as you see, ema or chadogu, those things. But then after 1870, which is right after Meiji Restoration, something like Seifuku Hinagata. So this is like uniform catalog. Or Hinagata, Jinmin Hikke Negai Todoke Hinagata Shu. So basically these are the official forms sample book, something like that. But the subject matter distribution is, as you see, the technology and arts are the mostly primary subject matter in Hinagata. So here is how Edo period people use Hinagata according to Nishikawa Tsukenobu. So mother and two daughters are looking at Hinagata, kimono Hinagata, and saying like, how beautiful, or look at this pattern. So these are the sort of way people use Hinagata as an example. Or rather, like this couple looks very leisurely looking into Hinagata and even personalizing the pattern. So maybe they decided which pattern they want for her kimono next time. So, oh, by the way, these images are from New York Public Library's Nishikawa Tsukenobu's book. Now, let's move on to, I want to show our record, our collection. And then, this is a typical bibliographic record of a Harvard library system. So as you see, the title and very regular formats, but including the statement for the digitization. So this digital master was created according to benchmark of faithful blah, blah, blah. So this statement gives you the idea how what specification of this digital image was created. And then also another notable point I want to say is that this group was given Japanese art and design digitization project. So using this as a term, you can draw all record under this project, which and each record has a link to the view online online icon, so that if you click there, you can jump into the images. So now, here is the example, and as you see, this is a thumbnail view of the book on the Mirado platform. And Mirado is this platform is developed specifically for IIIF standard, and Harvard libraries, all digital objects are now delivered through this Mirado platform starting 2 years ago. So now you can select images, like each image is close up, and this is, for example, car 15 and car 14. So the customers use these numbers to specify which specific pattern they want. And this one is in one sense significant because it has usually these Edo period Hinagata catalogs are so anonymous, and there is no way to know who and who made or who used. But this one has his own owner's name, Kyoto Kawamotoya Bunbei. So we know this was in Kyoto, and this most likely merchant Kawamotoya Bunbei used this for his business. So again, this is a thumbnail view. And this is number 6 and 60 and 61. You may want some of this flowery design. Or this. And this is a close-up view, but so customers can select any quite wide range of design. Now, next one. This is a this one is, again, least anonymous because there are clearly stated the owner's business and even address, Kanda Sudacho Nichome. And his business is Somemono Dokoro. And his name is Maekawa Isuke. So it's really interesting to trace the purpose of this type of catalog. So this is, again, thumbnail view. And then you can see the individual images. And as you see, each page, each image has that clear stamp saying the Maekawa Isuke, Sudacho, Kanda Sudacho Nichome. So every page has this stamp. So quite business-minded owner. And this is another very traditional pattern of flower and birds. And these are all hand-drawn by, I imagine, anonymous artists of those days. And so again, this period, this type of catalogs almost always non-attribution about artists. So now let's move on to the modern era. So Japan obviously opened the door in 1868. Then suddenly, here is I want to so describe historical background. So this new regime is different from Tokugawa government. They're determined to be, I have to go fast. So, but anyway, they're determined to be modernized country, and so again, so they dispatched their own delegation, but also art and other objects to many expo at that time, around that time, starting Paris Expo, which was done by Tokugawa regime. But next Vienna one was the first one for Meiji new government display their own products. And again, Japanese government opened school, basically in order to catch up the industrialized Western nations. The Meiji government promoted art and design to make export product attractive for the Western market. The Meiji government opened schools to train designers, held several domestic industrial expos like Naikoku Kangyo Hakurankai. Meanwhile, Europe entered this era of international expo starting in London in 1855. So this Tokugawa's display in Paris Expo 1867 was well received in the popular trend of Japonism. And then Vienna Expo was the first one for Meiji government. And the government not only sent their products, but also many students to learn Western technologies and systems. So this is typical Meiji government behavior. And then as we just heard that the interest in and the influence of Japanese art and design in the West during this time are well studied, so I skip this topic. But now I'd like to show how contemporary Japanese craft people, artisans, and art designers had learned and evolved during this period through our collection. This 3-volume set of kimono hinagata was produced in 1886 by Yamanaka Kichirobe, who is a founder of the Yamanaka Company. That was a prominent Japanese antique dealer with branches in Europe and London, Paris, and also US in like New York and Boston. And that was, so in those days, of course, many museums, such as Metropolitan Museum, New York, or others, acquired many Japanese objects through this Yamanaka company. So Yamanaka company was, in a way, influential or instrumental for so distribute Japanese art physically. So, showing this, I should have shown this. So this is Mr. Yamanaka, and that's the Boston branch, which ran until the end of wartime, 1944. And the bottom is Kyoto Gallery. So this is a book Yamanaka Kichibe produced, which is very traditional format. So again, we see it didn't stop at in the beginning of Meiji Restoration, the traditional Edo practice of kimono hinagata, and even more elaborate production. And perhaps this is because Yamanaka's savvy business mind sees a foreign market. The fact that this book came from Stillman attests that too. And then, oops. So yeah, here let's just browse these one. And meanwhile, Japanese elite artists who were dispatched to Europe did variety of study and exploration about designs. For example, this Karasa Kyuzo. So he did he drew and published this book. This is about study of antiquity. And these are typical pattern he drew from treasures from Shosoin or ancient temples. So going back to Japan's antiquity. And then this one, following slides shows many Japanese groups, designers groups such as this Nihon Ishokai or others started to produce publication to show their own work, members' work. So this is like the typical page, each member's work and title. Looks rather traditional one. And this is Isho Sekai by Seibikai, their own rule is pasted here. So again, this member's work is published here like this, which is rather look modern, but while these are more traditional. So wide range. And again, Shinzuan is another member publication in Kyoto, and they put a statement. Their mission is improve and make progress in our design. So this is a page view, but you see variety of artists from start to see more or less anonymous by their works. So for example, this is Kamisaka Sekka's Tsunagi Moyo, the work. So now, Cairo, this is actually a University of Michigan copy, which is fully digitized. And I just want to point out this is Kamisaka Sekka's work on waves. And this is 1903, and already quite modern design Kamisaka is exploring. And here, another artist called Kaigai Tennen, who is now, much about his biography is known, but still he left this work. This is a haori, which is a kimono jacket for male, the lining design. So inside kimono jacket, haori is lining design, such as this. So the format is traditional, but his design is quite bold and sees his experimentation. And now another artist called Shoun, this is also quite elaborate production of kimono free-sode design like this. So just to simply appreciate this. Oops. And I just want to touch on the Bijutsukai and Shin-Bijutsukai, which was another design magazine at the turn of the century. And the Bijutsukai was earlier generation, then, as you see the names here. Then Shin-Bijutsukai, which is starting 1902 to 4, so it's more sort of modern influence. And this was Furuya Korin, which is quite influential at that time, the designer. His compilation of design work like this, a little more modern than used to be, or even this sort of see the new eras of designs. Then Furutani Korin also, like he's a student of Sekka and studied clouds and mist, Unkashu. And this is a study of clouds and mist in 2 volumes. And another one, Korin's work, Kogenobi, in 3 volumes, which is just beautifully executed color woodblock prints of accordion prints. So I love this frog. But, so it's very much Korin's wide range of artistic interest, but also technique, and this is another Korin's design of base. So this indicates, seems like what's coming next. Then another artist, Nishida Ungai, is also showing his quite interesting work of exploration. These are Fusuma design, but Stillman calls it wallpaper design. So that's interesting gap. Oops. So these are the Nishida Ungai's work. And again, then I just want to point out, this is another example. I showed you more designer-oriented work here, but this is a quite interesting case of other aspects of design for, say, tenugui or hanten, which is uniform of those days, or furoshiki or nobori, that type of design. So these are the design of workers' uniform, and or those tenugui for small merchant business activities or trademarks. So this is this is how they dye fabric, quite traditional way, not highly industrialized in like mass production, and they created these for ordinary daily workers' uniform, or trademarks or noren for sento, the public bath, or pawn shop, all kinds. And here's some shrines event flag here, or labels. So these are the, this indicates these illustrations, illustration shows how they dyed fabric, but they still this catalog shows design matters in daily life of common people in Meiji period, and some designers worked for them. So final observation, so this relatively small sample of visual catalogs produced in 5 decades since 1860 attests that Japanese visual art and design in 1860s through 1910 had grown richly and made a critical artistic achievement while learning from the New World, meaning West, and its own tradition. And there is no single narrative to describe this development and activities, but multiple narratives with multiple perspectives, some of which are interrelated, are needed to understand them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are now ready to take your orders. Are there any questions, please? Yes, Veronique.
Yes. I wanted to know why this collection was chosen for digitization. Is it because it's an important part of the Stillman collection, or is it because for scholars that want to study those documents? Thank you.
You're welcome. Actually, this is as I mentioned earlier. This is not well explored or not highly used by users from librarians' perspective. So I wanted to show the world that we have this to make them visible. So that's my main sort of, motivation to digitize them.
Not only librarians, I think also museums and of course fashion designers. Fashion designers all over the world use these pattern books these days.
Right.
So they are important.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Then there is one announcement before we go to the coffee break.
矢部さんに代わりまして、でっちが休憩の後ろに飲み物がありますので、好きなのを取って、この部屋だけでなくて、この建物どこでもいいんで、持って行ってください。で、15分ぐらい押してますので、12時にしましょうか。シャープ、12時シャープ、戻ってくること。はい、お願いします。
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No,
はい。
お願いします。
入った。じゃあ最初のプレゼンなんですけど、ハワイ大学からいらしたバゼルさんですね、の、歌舞伎コレクションに関して、報告していただきます。よろしくお願いします。
Well, thank you very much for organizing this wonderful, wonderful conference. My name is Tokiko Bazzell. At the University of Hawaii at the Manoa Library. Yes, I made a long trip from Hawaii yesterday, so I am very, very happy to be here. Okay, today, while you were taking a break, we jumped from the Meiji Edo period to Showa. So I'm going to talk about right after the World War II. And I'd like to discuss our special collection called the Stanley Kaizawa Kabuki Collection. The Kaizawa Collection in short. Then I will talk about... Okay, I will talk about the Kaizawa Collection digital project. And then lastly, I'd like to share my thoughts for the future. Okay, the Kaizawa Collection has three resources in three groups. One group contains 135 items, about 3,300 pages of English translations of the Kabuki play script. But what is special about those scripts is that they were censored by the Allied forces in Japan right after the World War II. The second group contains 3 photo albums, and our donor, Stanley Kaizawa, took many of those photos while he was stationed in Japan during the occupation period. And lastly, the third group contains interview tapes between Dr. James Brandon and Stanley Kaizawa. Dr. Brandon was our professor at the University of Hawaii Theater and Dance Department, and he was a well-known Kabuki scholar. Okay, briefly, I'd like to discuss the censorship during the Allied occupation period in Japan. Well, to help democratize Japan, books, magazines, newspapers were censored. Also, broadcast media, such as radio, telephone, telegrams communications, and performing arts, such as no, joruri, and kabuki, were censored. There are 2 major units which carried out GHQ censorship policies. This is a chart that Dr. Brandon created, and I'd like to take a look at each major unit of this. The first unit is called the Civil Information and Education section. Its mission was to promote and educate democracy, freedom, and individual liberty through public education and media. The second unit is called the Civil Censorship Detachment, CCD. Its mission was to suppress feudalist, militarist, and ultra-nationalist messages in the mass media. It seems rather ironical to me because these types of messages seem to be back in fashion nowadays. Not in the United States, but also in the world. Anyway, I'd like to take a look at closer to this CCD, okay? Well, later in 1945, doesn't come out? Yeah, okay. Later in 1945, Lieutenant Earl Ernst Okay, here. Okay, here he is. He organized a theatrical subsection of the CCD. Okay, and Lieutenant Ernst later became Professor Ernst at the University of Hawaii's Theater and Dance Department. So the CCD censors in a circle reviewed kabuki play scripts and trained production companies such as Shochiku on what was acceptable and what was not. So I'd like to focus on the resources produced by this CCD section, and especially this subsection of the CCD. The CCD censored materials were originally intended to be destroyed, but many survived and were scattered to different locations. For example, censored Japanese language publications were actually deposited at University of Maryland and became known as the Plangi collection. So some of you probably know about it, okay? But the Japanese language censored kabuki scripts were deposited at the Shochiku Otani Library, which was created by the Shochiku company at that time. The majority of English censored kabuki scripts were stored at the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, we call it, in Maryland. Then Japan's National Diet Library created microfiche of the NARA's materials, and these are available on site at the National Diet Library. So, how did some of the English censored scripts were deposited or end up at our library in Hawaii? That's what I'm going to talk about. Okay, let me introduce Stanley Kaizawa here. Stanley was a second generation of Japanese American in Hawaii, and he was one of those American censors. He worked directly under Lieutenant Ernst, and Kaizawa secretly shipped some of the censored English translations to Hawaii when he learned those materials were supposed to be destroyed. He just simply said he wanted to save some of the records. And he kept those at his Honolulu home for over 50 years. Okay, let's meet the other major American censors described here. Ernst, Palestine, Kaizawa, last one is Nagata, and in this picture, Joseph Goldstein and Fabian Bowers. Alexander Calhoun, censors, and Japanese nationals hired by the CCD reviewed both English and Japanese kabuki scripts, and they left their notes and comments on the scripts. Interestingly, some of those American censors became big fans of kabuki. So, for example, Kaizawa later returned to Japan to take private lessons in kabuki songs and dance, and he kept in touch with many famous kabuki actors throughout his life. So here, I'd like to talk about our digital project. None of those materials were available when we received the Kaizawa collection in 2000. But last year, in 2016, the Shochiku Otani Library digitized their Japanese censored scripts and made some of them available online. Since no English translations scripts are still not accessible, I just wanted to change that. So my project involves the following 5 major tasks: to digitize the scripts, to textualize OCR the scripts, to create a searchable notation list, to digitize the photos and create metadata, and create transcripts of the interviews between Brandon and Kaizawa. Luckily, last year, 2016, a scholar of the Kyoto Seika University agreed to finance the project. Very lucky. So we started the project in October 2016, and we are expected to be done by March 2019. Okay. This chart shows the timeline of the project. You can see we spent a lot of time and energy creating a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, between 2 universities. And one aspect was budget compliance between international institutions with the different accounting systems and rules. So just gives you an example here. When budgeting, many factors, financial factors, need to be taken into account. For example, foreign exchange rates. We lost some money last time. Bank fees associated with wire transfers, very high. Up. And currency conversion. Public universities' requirements for external grants, such as requirements or responsibilities for indirect costs. For example, University of Hawaii charges whopping 30% for indirect costs. And each university's account setup requirements. For this requirement, we have to use the, in the United States, it's a very common system called the My Grant system, which is required by the Office of Research Services. And it's not that easy. I have to tell you, you have to really learn a lot about this. And on this project, most of the funding is for student assistance. So a whole set of requirements for student employment needed to be addressed. So it takes a while. Well, technology, and this conference is focused on the technology. Yes, technology has advanced, and it has helped. However, the human labor has been the most important element for this project. We reformatted cassette tapes into CD-ROMs, but to create the transcripts, we had to listen to entire interviews over and over again. And the interview tapes themselves have poor sound quality, so they have a lot of background noise. And Mr. Kaizawa's very soft-spoken voice is very hard to understand. And later, we did found some of Dr. Brandon's actually written notes and transcripts, such as these. But I have to tell you, it's not that easy to read somebody else's handwriting. We had to, get used to his handwriting style, and there are so many military terminologies we had to learn. So in order to create the typed transcript like this, it takes substantial time. Okay, how about digitizing photos and creating the metadata of the photos? Okay, first we photographed each photos of the page. Photographed the pages of each album in order to document the photo sequence and capture the descriptions, such as this. Whoops. you can see, kind of difficult to maneuver. Album itself has some descriptions by here, Stanley Kaizawa. So we need to actually document those things. At the end, this last slide shows some of the memorabilia or ephemera he pasted on the page. So we have to peel those items to scan, each side. So after this, each photo has to be removed from the album and scanned according to the following specs. And no post-scanning enhancements were applied this time. Then we created the photo metadata based on these metadata schema. It was very challenging to create the metadata, as a matter of fact. We had to do substantial research for the photos, especially with no descriptions with them. So this is an example. This is the group photo. Luckily, Mr. Kaizawa left some description at the back of the photo. So based on this information, we created the metadata, such as this. On the contrary, this photo doesn't have any descriptions left by Mr. Kaizawa. So we have to look into the photo itself. When you look very closely, long enough, the sign in the background starts giving out some clues, like this. So the sign, upper part of the sign, faded out, right? Can you see it? Whoa, it's not that clear, okay. The lower part of the sign actually is visible. So we really look closely, longly, then we eventually find out this sign says parachute infantry. It took a while though. Then with further research, there was actually the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment existed in Morioka, Iwate Prefecture. So we could enhance our metadata, incorporated this information. Let's move on to OCR and notations part. This is an image of the play script called Hiko-san, Gongen Chikai no Sukedachi. This is just an image. After OCR, of course, we can search every word, such as warrior in the script. So this is our. And also we wanted to capture or document the notations or comments left on the scripts by those American censors, okay? So those two are our objectives under this specific task. We use the Abby Fine Reader to create OCR text. Okay, but due to the physical condition of the scripts, as you can see, and also notations were written, handwritten by those American censors, and its OCR accuracy wasn't that high. Okay, so we spent many hours focusing, many hours actually verifying information, cleaning up and correcting errors. I'd like to show some example. This is the English translation of the Kanadehon Chushingura. So when Abby Fine Reader tries to read, it actually recognizes that handwritten portion as an image, in the red square. And then try to read the text portion in green squares. But this one is not clear, but a lot of garbage come out. So first, we need to define which text we want Abby to read, those green parts. But still, quite a few errors coming up. Like this, even defined. There are so many errors. So we have to correct those errors manually. That's a lot of task. Okay, how are we performing these all tasks? Oh, why is this then? Okay. Okay. I name it the cross-task team approach. This is my own word. Okay, since 3 tasks, OCR, photo data, metadata, and transcripts are closely related, I assigned each student to perform all 3 tasks so that they can rotate between the tasks and check each other's work. So we learned that cross-checking the information like this way helped answer many questions. For example, I showed you this photo, right, with some description at the back, and created the metadata. Later on, in an interview transcript, we found Mr. Kaizawa was talking about this photo, saying PPB, this one is one section called Press Pictorial Broadcasting Media Division, was located in Radio Tokyo, then moved to Kanto Hayden Building, and eventually moved to Shisei Kaikan in Hibiya. And this photo must be taken in 1946 because he was mentioning it is the rooftop of Radio Tokyo. So we incorporated this new information into a metadata so we could enhance. So close communication, teamwork, and passion are very critical for success. Finally, I'd like to share some thoughts, my thoughts for the future. Okay. I expect our 3rd-year project, all the English transcripts, photos, metadata, and interview transcripts will be posted in our library's repository. I know there are so many mistakes, so many unknown information or missing information in those works. But my hope is that once those materials become available to everyone, others will help fill in the missing information or fix incorrect information. Basically, I'm hoping others can make corrections. And also, once those are available, the researchers can make comparisons between the English transcripts and the Japanese transcripts. Those are both censored. Here's again image of Hiko-san, Gongen script. Okay, let's take a look at a little bit. Okay, this one was indeed censored on July 6, 1946 by JG is a Joseph Goldstein, one of those censors. It was suppressed due to a revenge motivation in a script. Okay. But when you are if you look at the Shochiku Otani's Japanese scripts in the same play, this was indeed censored on October the 3rd, 1947, about a year later, by F.B. Fabian Bowers, and this one was actually indeed passed. It's very difficult to see, but there is a censored passed stamp on it. And indeed, this play was played at Mizukoshi Gekijo in 1947. So I would say this type of cross-textual analysis could be possible. So what about the rest of the surviving English translations stored in Nara and the microfiche version of the National Diet Library? Well, Nara has absolutely no plans to digitize and make them available. So no help there. Okay, NDL. They considered the microfiche a low priority because the subject is too narrow, and they haven't received any request for this materials. So when I visited an NDL in June this year, I requested these microfiche be placed in their digitization agenda, and NDL said we would, or they will consider it. Okay. Meanwhile, they suggested me I should purchase the copy of microfiche from NDL and make them available on site at our library. But the microfiche is organized at the box level, so I will have to buy the entire boxes of the microfiche, or I have to select relevant items on site at the NDL, whichever comes less expensive. So I do have very high expectations for NDL. Please help. You know, we always do that. But as of today, there's no plan yet, and things are uncertain as of today. So I'd like to think about the subject matter. And that's very true. The subject about kabuki censorship is narrow. But what does it mean to the research community? To me, it concerns very much that information isn't available to the research community simply because it's considered a very narrow or niche subject. I would like to think this way. If the information is made available, it may provide insights into the overall context of U.S. strategic cultural policy toward Japan during the occupation period. So I am hopeful that people and institutions see the value in making these or similarly narrow subject materials available for research and education. Thank you.
ハワイ大学のバゼルトキコさんの発表でした。大変参考になるためになる発表だったと思いますけど、質問などある方いらっしゃいますか。
栗田さん。
すみません、日本語でいいですか。
はい。
歌舞伎は私も大好きなテーマなので面白く聞かせていただきました。ありがとうございます。先ほどOCR の話が出てたと思うんですけれども、そのお使いになったその IAPBY ファインリーダーっていうのですか、それはプリントの方はほぼ 100% 大丈夫ということ、プリントされた文字。
ダメ 100% じゃありません。
そうですか。
かなりひどいです。
手書きはほとんど判読できないというような理解でよろしいですか。それでその場合生徒たちがそれを全部テキスト化するということですけれども、精度は生徒たちで十分なのでしょうか。
はい、質問ありがとうございます。日本語でいいのかな？英語？どちらでも。Okay, so I'm going to talk about in English. Thank you very much for the very good question. Even that actually OCR accuracy is not good because there are so many typing errors in the script and also faded, very deteriorated. The originals are very deteriorated. And also there are so many Romanized Japanese terms in it too. So that contributed very low accuracy. And let alone the handwritten documents. You know, I do actually have some slides available. This is an index, so somebody actually wrote in hand, by hand, handwritten. And this is very difficult to see, but you can see it's a garbage, right? Because Abby can't recognize many of those handwritings. So we have to retype manually like this way. And this is very short, so it's not too bad. So we can actually do OCR search like this way. But if this is a 3,100 pages of scripts, I don't think so. I don't think so. And students are having a hard time even recognize handwritten text these days. You know, I am much better than the student these days. Even young people, they are having a hard time to understand the handwritten things. Okay, so I'm hoping somebody can actually create much better, OCR software. Hamish.
What do they get out of it apart from the practice? Are they being paid to do this? Is it somehow incorporated into their courses that they're doing?
Okay, two things. We don't have the students who want to work free, in a sense, because they can, get some money for their, tuitions. And Hawaii is a very expensive place. So they wanted to make some, supplemental money for their living or studying. So, like I said, this grant, most of the grant goes to student, payment. But I actually advertise this job among the students who might be interested in. We do have a theater and dance, and Dr. Brandon actually taught there. And we do have a Dr. Julie Yetzi, who is teaching Kabuki right now. So I recruited those students who are very much interested in Kabuki, and they got really big out of this, and they loved it. And now we do have 2 students who are studying Japanese language and linguistics. And the other one is actually a library science. So they are very, very interested in, I think they are now truly putting their extra energy for this project.
はい、すいません。もう時間が次のプレゼンの時間が来てしまいましたので、はい、質問はじゃあ休憩時間の間にお願いします。それでは2人目のプレゼンターのありがとうございました。ごめんなさい。そうですね。ありがとうございました。じゃあ、2人目のプレゼンですね、国際日本文化研究センターからいらした前川しおりさんの発表で大衆文化研究 フィンランド大学のサロマンさんの発表です。フィンランド国立図書館の日本コレクションに関する発表です。
So, hello everyone, nice to be here again. So this is my third time at the EAJRS, so I'm very happy that I can give a presentation here again. And it's nice to see so many people who have helped me. So since Bucharest, I was able to take part for the Japan Art Librarian course. It was really useful. And I could visit Sainsbury, and then later I was at the Nichibunken for 10 days, so it has been really fruitful time. So today I would like to introduce the National Library of Finland, what kind of Japanese collections there are. But before going that, so last year at EAJRS I presented my new project, which is called Tracing for Uncatalogued Japanese Artifacts in Finland. And I have found a lot of private collections and really many interesting collections in Finland. But I also found out that there are like 5 big collections which I should concentrate first. And the biggest collection is the National Museum of Finland, which has over 1,000 Japanese artifacts. And there is a really good catalog on this one. And even it's also identified by Japan. The Museum of Osaka, the Minsaku Hakubutsukan, has identified the objects there. And then there is really interesting project, the GBIE, the Japanese Buddhist Art in European Collections, which Joseph Greiner started. And Professor Ogutsi from Hosei University, can you raise your hand so everyone knows, is also here. So very good. The first time at EAJRS, so really interesting project, the European art, the Buddhist art at the European collections. So he has studied the project also in Finland to make the digitalize the object and to see it on the web. Today I will introduce the National Library of Finland, and then there is also, maybe next year I could introduce the Finnish Museum of Natural History, which has really interesting Japanese insect collections and many other collections. And then there is the Finnish National Gallery and Design Museum, and the Dr. Halén introduced the Japonisme exhibition, which has been in Norway, but it started from Finland, and it's really good cataloged what kind of Japan-related artifacts there are at the National Museum and the Design Museum. So there is a catalog on that one. But many of the donators of these 5 museums are the same, or the collectors are the same. So I feel it's important to go through all of these collections. Like there is the person called Antel, who was the biggest donator of the Japanese collections, and he donated to all of these museums something. So the National Library of Finland, some history. It started in 16. This is the main entrance of the National Library, the picture. And it started in 1640 from Turku. And there is now the Turku University, but it's the different university. Nowadays, Turku University was established in 1920s, but Helsinki University started from Turku in 1640s. And in 18th century, Finland was part of Sweden. So all the copies of what books were published in Sweden, there was an order that all of the copies should be presented to also to Finland, or to Turku, that time Turku University National Library. Unfortunately, that collection was burned later, so that collection is not left. And in 1809, Finland became an autonomous part of the Russian Empire, and from 1820s to 1970, the library was provided with deposit copies of publications published in Russia. And this is today's Slavonic library. So it's very unique in the world, because there are some materials which cannot be found anymore in Russia, but they are deposited. They can find from the Slavonic library in Helsinki. And in 1828, the university was moved to Helsinki, and it started to operating under name of Imperial Alexander University. And from 1919, it was called University of Helsinki Library. And then there is a big confusion. From 206, the name was changed to the National Library of Finland. So before 2006, it was the University of Helsinki Library, and from 2006, it's the National Library. And there is still University of Helsinki Library, so this is a big confusion. Like I have the catalog of the Japonica collection. It's published under the Helsinki University Library, but actually it's the National Library collection. So the National Library of Finland has some Japanese collections, the Japonica collection, Buddhist collection, then interesting is this Nordenskiöld collection, the Japanese maps and drawings, and Slavonic library, what kind of Japanese material they have. I will introduce some of these ones today. And of course there are thousands of books, English books, Finnish books related to Japan, but I'm not going to introduce those today. This is the Japonica collection at the National Library's book storage. There is no access to this one. No outsiders cannot go there, only librarians can go there. And so here is the amount of the books. And it's called Japonica collection, but it means Japanese books at the National Library, because there was no librarian, or there is still no librarian who could make catalog or who could transliterate the books. So everything Japanese was put together. And then it was later called Japonica collection. And the first donators for the collection was already done in 1930s, or first books. But the first catalog was done in 1970s. It was done by Grinster Erik. And then later was the Wagner's Union Catalogue of East Asian Materials in Scandinavian Libraries in 1981. But the Wagner had only 2 days to spend only few days to spend in Helsinki, so he couldn't really make the catalog. And the books were moved really many times at the warehouses, so the numbers were different from the first ones. And I made the catalog while I was studying at the Helsinki University at the Helsinki University in 1994, and there is in the catalog, there is the concordance of the three catalogs, so it's the numbers doesn't match, and then there is still something like 100, 200 books still missing or somewhere. There can be somewhere in the warehouse. And when I made this catalog, so we decided at the that time Helsinki University Library that we put it to the order of the donators. So it's quite interesting for the history of Finland and Japan to make it that way. And there are about 2,000 volumes, 617 entries, and 7 donators. And the first one is the Japan-Finnish Society donation. Also, it's called Mitsui donation sometimes, because Baron Takaharu Mitsui donated 100,000 Finnish marks in 1930s to buy Japanese books. And later, the Japanese-Finnish Society augmented Mitsui's donation by presenting the University Library with 390 volumes, 125 titles, volumes of literature in Japanese. So this is the start of the so-called Japonica collection. And then there is the Carl Gustav Edman donation, and he was the Finnish ambassador to Japan in 39 to 44. Quite interesting donation is the Arne Mustonen donation with 180 titles. The Japanese embassy in Helsinki was closed down in November 1944, and the embassy's library was bought by a second-hand dealer who later sold the books to librarian Arne Mustonen. And the books are mainly concerned with Japanese politics, and it's really interesting that this Arne Mustonen was the librarian at the National Library at that time, or the Helsinki University Library at that time, and he was studied Japanese at the Helsinki University, and he bought these books. And it's also interesting because Sugihara was, before becoming famous, he was in Helsinki, posted in 1938. So some of the Sugiharas, it might be that some of these books were used by Sugihara during his Helsinki time. And then there is a Keravuora Papa donation with 135 titles. Not so interesting one. But then the fifth one, the Gustav John Ramstedt donation, is really interesting. Ramstedt was the first Finnish ambassador to Japan, and he was also really famous linguistics in Altai languages, Mongolian, and he was the one of the first foreigners writing Korean grammar in Western languages, and these Ramstedt books with notes of the Korean language and books he used, those are Japanese books he used to study Korean language. And also there is 2 really rare books, is Miyazawa Kensi's Haruto Shura and Ihatoba Dova, were presented by Miyazawa to Ramstedt, while Ramstedt was also famous Esperanto linguistics, and Miyazawa visited one of his presentations in Tokyo and wanted to donate his books to Ramstedt. And these are the first editions, only like 200 copies were done of the first edition. So there have been some Japanese researchers coming to Helsinki and see the books, and those are really rare ones. And also there is a separate manuscript collection including Ramstedt notes and letters. And then there is the Varja, and there are some maps and some from the Antel collection, 1 Hokusai sketchbooks from 1870s. I'm not specialist on these ones, but if someone gets interested, you can find those at the National Library collection. And then the catalogs, I have it with me. If someone is interested, please take a look. This is the Buddhist collection at the National Library of Finland. And I don't know what is this Soto Zen Buddhist Association. There is only note which can be found that the Japanese Soto Zen Buddhist Association donated books to the University of Helsinki in 1968. This is the whole amount you can see on this big picture. There's a huge amount. In 1968, the Sotosen organization donated 257 titles to the library. And there are like 2,000 volumes. And in 1973, 250 new titles. There is no catalog of this second donation. But for the first donation, most of the books are written in 1950s and 1960s. And if someone is interested I have the catalog also with me. But it's not clear what is this Sotosen association which donated the books. Maybe some of you have information if there is similar collections at the European libraries. This kind of, and why they donated. But I made an interview to one Helsinki University researcher who has used these books, and he said that those are probably somehow related to the Komasawa University. Most of the books are written by the Komasawa University researchers, and maybe they had some extra copies which they wanted to donate it. But why they choose Helsinki, I really have no idea. And there are some. It starts with number 1, Hosaka Kyokusen, and so on, and it continues. And you can borrow those books, but it seems that in 40 years, no one has used, only this one researcher has used the books, but no one at Helsinki University hasn't used. But also that students don't know about it. Somehow I feel that nowadays students, they are not so interested in what's nearby them. They want to go to Japan and read books there, but it's for some reason they are not interested in the books which are just on the next building. This is the Buddhist collection at the National Library. Then I skip to the Nordenskiöld, which is really interesting collection, not the Japanese one, but the other one is that the Nordenskiöld was born in Helsinki 1932, and he had a position at the University of Helsinki. And later he needed to leave for the political reasons to Stockholm. And he was in 1958 was invited as a director and professor of mineralogical department of National Museum in Stockholm. So that's why. So he has strong. He was born in Finland but lived rest of his life in Sweden. So that's why he is called also like a Finnish emigrant in Sweden, close ties with Finland is maybe good description who he was. And had 10 expeditions to Arctic regions, and maybe this picture is one of the most famous ones when he was the first one to sail the Northeast Passage and arrived to Japan in 1879. I think this painting is now at the Göteborg Art Museum. And while he was in Japan, he bought a lot of Japanese books. And the Nordenskiöld scientific collections are in several places. At the National Museum in Stockholm, and then the Royal Swedish Academy has the Japanese library. Both in Japan, September and October 1879, 1,050 titles and 5,500 volumes. And there is this Edgren's catalog of the Nordenskiöld collection made in 1980. And then there is a collection at the Åbo Academy and in Ethnographical Museum in Sweden. But the Geographical and Cartographic Library is in Helsinki. And it's one of at the UNESCO's Memory of the World Register since 1997. Huge collection, 24,000 pre-19th century maps, and catalog lists 3,870 publications in 5,000 volumes. And this is the catalog of the collections. It has 6 volumes, so it's really huge, really one of the most famous cartographic collections in the world. Some of the, there is a good article on the Japanese maps and prints, can be found from this magazine. It's in Swedish, but it's a good article written by John Westerholm in 1984. And while Nordenskiöld was in Japan, he wanted to visit the volcanoes. So on the way to, just a second, to Asamayama, he visited Kusatsu and Center Honshu and so on. And I think he bought more like a souvenirs. But anyway, these are some of the not so good. I just visited the warehouse before coming here and took some of the pictures. And these are the maps or prints at the Nordenskiöld collections, which he picked up on the way to the volcanoes. And this map. And then there is also very famous ESO map from northern Japan, this 422, and some Kamakura maps. Okay, I have 1 minute. And then there's this the map collection of the Japanese maps from the beginning of the Meiji period. And this is the bird eye view of the Kamakura. But there are altogether 30 maps related to Japan at the Nordenskiöld collection. And these are in the maps. There are catalogs. These are not in the catalog. You can find a file where is title Others. Then you can open it and there comes the Japanese maps. So you really need to go to the warehouse and find it, and then you can find these maps there. Slavonic Library, as I told you, it was created in 19th century from the Russian collections. And some of the Japanese material at the library, there are posters from the Russo-Japanese War and maps from the Russian-Japanese War, and paintings, photo albums. If someone gets interesting, there are where you can find it, and you can find more info from Miss Irina Lukka, who is at the librarian at the Slavonic Library, and some photo albums from the Manchuria and so on. Quite interesting books. These are some posters from the Slavonic, from the Russia-Japanese War. Okay, I will finalize this one. I visited the warehouse after. I hadn't visited there like for 10 years, but before coming to this seminar, I visited there again, and I found out that, oh, what is this shell? Why there is a new shell? I haven't seen these books before. These are not Japanese ones, and I asked from the librarian, what is this one? Oh, they got a donation from Pertti Nieminen, who was the most famous translator from the Chinese language in Finland. But this is not known. No one knows that there is these books. It's not on the library web pages. It's not nowhere. I mean, we can still, when we go to the warehouses, we can find some really interesting collections. This is for those ones studying Chinese at the University of Helsinki. Really interesting, good collection, but no one knows about it. So it's. I feel that we really need to go still to the warehouse and to the back doors, and we still can find many interesting materials. Okay, very quick presentation. Thank you.
フィンランド大学テロ・サルマーさんの、発表でした。質問ある方、5分ぐらい時間ありますので、じゃあどうぞ。
Thank you very much for interesting presentation. As I am from Finland, so I'm very interested to see a whole picture of the collection, Japonica collection, and also I am very interested in why this nice material has not been used from Finnish researchers or researchers who belong to the Finnish research institutions. And surely the catalog you made helps a lot researchers to access materials, but as you mentioned, these collections have not organized. And my question is, are there any future plans this collection would be organized by Finnish institutions or any other international institutions?
Unfortunately, no, because the library is lacking of the stuff, and it's if there is some outside funding, then they can do something, but not with the stuff what they have now. There is a Tibetan collection, many interesting collections. There is no catalog of it. So we are talking about digitalization here, but there are still a lot of material with no catalog, nothing at the shelves. Yes.
I have got a question about Northern-Shoulder collection.
Yeah.
Our understanding is the uniqueness of Northern-Shoulder collection is the information about the book prices. And because that is very important, I think, for even Japanese scholars. Your collection, the collection of the National Library of Finland, Northern-Shoulder collection included the information about the book prices. When he purchased those Japanese books in Japan, he kept, I think, he has kept the record, I think.
Okay, yes. And here is, and today's value, it's written here, he spent something like $150,000 for buying the maps and books. And yes, this is really unvaluable. I mean, it's.
I think, British expedition is HMS Challenger, and the staff, the members of those expeditions, they purchased a lot of Japanese books. Yes. I think both they went to around the same time to Japan, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So very similar kind of expeditions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. An additional question, 24,000 maps, only 30 are of Japan, right?
Yes, I think those he bought
and
by
then
himself.
The 5,000 volumes, that must be descriptions of travels or travelogues or I mean the publications, I assume.
Yeah, but this is really maps.
Yeah, I know, but then the 5,000 volumes, that must be travel description.
Yes, travels, yes.
And about the Japonica collection, because it's been constituted over a fairly long time, I guess that it also may contain some Chinese books.
Actually, no, there is a Chinese collection, which is also not uncatalogued Chinese collection.
In many not well catalogued collections, you find sometimes Chinese books in Japanese collection and vice versa.
Yeah, but somehow, some reason this has been separated. But there is also really great Chinese collection.
And who actually spent the money that Baron Takahara Mitsui donated? I mean, who did the purchases?
I think it was that time the University Helsinki Library. They bought English books with that money.
Okay, thank you.
そろそろ時間なので、じゃあお昼に入ります。はい。発表を
Thank you very much. Now, practical information. Lunch, Norwegian way, this time, you can find wraps today back there. And one bottle of something you want to drink, you can take it. And please go through